Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Land Access webinar. This is the first webinar in the Cultivating Success Your Small Farm 2018 webinar series. We're really glad to have you on tonight. Right now we have 9 attendees on, and we do have a few people that will be coming on in the next few minutes. As you know, you've all come on in listen-only mode. So I'm going to introduce myself and my co-presenter, and then we'll talk about how to work the different aspects of the webinar. So tonight's topic is land access, a practical approach to finding land to farm. I'm Colette DePhelps. I'm a community food systems extension educator with University of Idaho, and I'm located in Moscow, Idaho. I've worked with small farms for about 20 years here on the Palouse, and land access has always been an issue for small farmers. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the things that are important to consider when you're looking for land, and we're really glad that you could be on. My co-presenter is Marci Miller. Marci is the Education Director for Rural Roots, and she is also a small farmer. Her and her husband operate Deep Roots Farm here in Moscow, Idaho. So she'll introduce herself and provide more information as the evening goes on. Here's a couple of webinar tips. Sometimes webinars take a lot of bandwidth, and so it'll be really helpful if you can close all the other programs running on your computer. And if you have any problems with your sound, clarity, variations in speed, you can switch to the phone, and a call-in number was provided in your welcome email. If you do switch to the phone, you're going to want to mute your computer sound so that you don't get feedback. There is a question box, and you can type in questions for speakers at any time throughout tonight's webinar, or if you're having some type of challenge with your picture or your sound, we can help you troubleshoot that. The questions are going to be answered at specific points in the webinar, and you'll see that we have a Q&A slide. There are also 5 handouts available for tonight's webinar. And in your control panel, which generally is on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a tab that says handouts. And if you open that, you'll see a list of handouts. One of those handouts is actually all the slides for tonight's webinar. And so you don't have to think that you'll need to try to capture the websites that we provide or the names of specific resources and the like. I will also refer to these other resources throughout the webinar tonight. And if you have any trouble downloading them, you can send me an email and I would be happy to email them to you directly. And the last slide of tonight's webinar is going to have my email address. So tonight we're going to talk about accessing farmland, and there's several topics that we're going to address. One are the different type of land tenure options. A second are key aspects of finding land to farm, things that you need to consider. And we're going to really emphasize steps you need to take to be prepared to find land and resources available to support you on this journey. So first, I want to take a poll so we know a little bit more about who's in the audience tonight. And if you haven't done a poll before, I'll launch the poll. You'll have an opportunity to use your mouse or your cursor to click on a specific box for your answers to the questions. And then once people have concluded the poll, I will launch and you'll see all the results. So I'm launching the first poll. Please tell us about yourself. So you can go ahead and click and let us know. So we have quite a few land seekers. We have a few landowners, some technical assistance providers in terms of extension or university employees, and agency or nonprofit staff. Okay, so 100% of The folks on tonight have voted, and so now I'll share the results. So as you can see, 60% or 67% of the people on tonight's webinar are looking for land. Another 33% are landowners. And we have a couple of people that are in the roles of education or technical assistance providers. So thank you. The second poll to help us know who's on tonight is asking about where are you located. Are you in North Idaho, Southeast Idaho, Southwest Idaho, Central Idaho? And you also have an option to say whether you're outside of Idaho. All right, about 75% have voted. Give it a couple more seconds for the last couple people to vote. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So about a quarter of our participants are in North Idaho and a quarter in Southwest Idaho, a few in Southeast Idaho, probably one person in Central Idaho with 8%, and then a quarter of our participants are outside Idaho. So thanks for sharing and helping us know a little bit more about who is on tonight. I want to start out by talking about what land tenure is. Land tenure really is the way people hold their land, and usually in terms of farmland, that is owning or leasing land. And it includes legal, political, and business considerations. And for landowners, there's responsibilities and rights that are defined by land use laws. And you might think of those as it could be a zoning law. It could be a law related to water rights. It could be a state law or a federal law related to natural resource management. So landowners are really responsible for making sure their land is managed in a way that is in accordance with those laws. For tenants, the responsibilities and rights that a tenant has in a rent or lease arrangement are spelled out in lease agreements. And really, they're spelled out in probably any type of land use agreement, whether or not it's considered a lease for payment, even if it's looking at having a crop share agreement as how you're going to define your lease and your land tenure. You're still going to have your rights and your responsibilities spelled out in those leases. One of the things we're really going to advocate tonight is that you actually have a written agreement and not a verbal agreement if you are a land seeker or a landowner. So we thought it would be helpful to understand if you are a land seeker, so about that 75% of people or so that are on our webinar tonight that are looking for land, we are going to ask you if you could let us know what type of land tenure arrangement you're looking for. So here's our poll. So it looks like some people would be open to either buying or leasing land. We have about half of the people that have voted. Almost 70% have voted. Okay, I'll just leave it open for a couple more seconds. So for those folks that are on tonight that are looking for land, about half are interested in buying land. A little bit more, 63% are also looking at leasing land, which means we have a few people that are looking to lease or rent only. One person is likely to obtain farmland through succession, maybe from family member or non-family member, and about a quarter of the folks are looking for free land to farm. Marci is going to go into depth and talk about the different land tenure options and some of the pros and cons of each.
Great, thank you, everyone. So glad that you're here this evening. I'm really passionate and excited about this topic because my husband and I have gone through several of these types of arrangements. And so it's exciting for me to share some of our personal experiences with land tenure options, what has worked, what has not worked so well, and what some of the challenges can be in that arena. So some of the land tenure options that we often think about are the lease and rent options, which could be private ownership, public ownership, or conserved land. So private ownership would be a private owner where you would have an agreement with another private landowner, and you would be able to set the terms of that agreement amongst yourselves. So public ownership, there are some examples of leasing space from municipalities, state entities. Oftentimes, those arrangements must go through some sort of process of, securing the lease, agreeing to the terms. You might be working with a board or a number of folks to work on that lease. And conserved land, many land trusts in the US now are looking towards agricultural land easements and continuing to use that land for agricultural purposes rather than it going to developers to build on. So there are some great options out there and some great models of land trusts who are working with farmers in different arenas. And here in Moscow, in northern Idaho, there's actually the Palouse Land Trust is a land trust that works with agricultural easements and working with potential landowners and potential farmers to lease that land. So purchase options, this can be kind of the gold standard, especially in a long-term vision of farming, getting on land that you know is secure and you can do with it what you will within zoning and other sorts of regulatory means is the gold standard. But many of us recognize, especially beginning farmers, that that's not usually feasible in the first few years of farming, except in special circumstances. Now, I did see that a few of you were interested in this quote unquote free land, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what some of those options are, and what's maybe some of the drawbacks are to that. Inheriting land is another option. I know that in my family, my grandfather owned a little bit of farmland before he passed, and it went to his daughters, my mom and her aunt and her sisters. But it was not land suitable for my husband and I to farm. It was a large scale conventional ag with no water available up near Spokane. So inheriting at that point stopped. And we sold it to the farmer who was farming it, and that succession planning, and there's a lot of resources available now for succession planning for farmers, whether it be family or non-family members. Let's see. So leasing and renting are an interchangeable term. We often talk about renting land in terms of paying, and leasing land is a more formal arrangement that we have a written lease in hand. So this is where my husband and I started farming 10 years ago now, that we looked at how could we, as we were still in college at the time, get on some land and start farming, and how can we learn to farm without the risk of a land payment, especially figuring out what our enterprises were going to be. We didn't want to be locked into this financial agreement that we felt was just too risky for where we were at in learning. You can grow slowly, so over time you can expand on that land in the right arrangement. You can even add on parcels of land. You can grow at multiple sites, which is what my husband and I did. We were at one time at 6 different sites in and around Moscow city limits, growing vegetables for market. And then oftentimes farmland, especially bare farmland that isn't in current use, can be fairly inexpensive. Maybe it's the cost of water, maybe it's the cost of, um, a large scale lease arrangement would be, which can be fairly inexpensive. When you start looking at plots of land within city limits or adjacent to city limits, you might be looking at a little bit more money that you might be spending on those. And also looking at exchange of goods. That is absolutely a valuable resource that you as a farmer have to offer a landowner, that they may be interested in exchanging a CSA share or some portion um, of of produce, or if you are a livestock producer or egg producer, there may be some arrangement that you can work out that is non-monetary, but it's good to get on paper what the monetary value of that will be, so you can have this exchange in negotiating terms. And leased land allows you to practice. It allows you to make mistakes without the consequences of owning your own land and making big mistakes. We obviously want to be good stewards of the land, but it allows you to really expand your knowledge without the risk of having a mortgage payment. So some of the drawbacks, you are investing in infrastructure, soil management, weed management, things that you need to be a successful farmer that you may end up having to walk away from in the long run. We think about some of the places that we have leased land from, and all of the work and all of the compost and all of the hand weeding that we have done on those plots of land that we've had to walk away from in the end after an 8-year lease was up, and we decided that was no longer a feasible option for us. And so it can be a little heartbreaking sometimes to walk away from all of that work, but recognizing that that's one of the drawbacks of leasing your land. You may need to travel if you live in town and you're traveling out of town to work on that land. You need to think about those costs of your gas and your time, and how are you going to account for those things in other ways. It can be a nice thing. We actually enjoyed many of sunrise and sunset driving to and from the farm that we leased outside of Moscow. So it was actually a time that we could kind of regroup, make lists for the day. What are we going to do? A little bit more planning time rather than just walking out the door. And in some cases, especially, if you're adjacent to or have a really great setup where there's lots of infrastructure already in place, you might be looking at a little bit higher rent prices. So purchasing land, if you can find bare land that is acceptable for what you're looking to do, it's a blank slate, and the possibilities are really endless. And it's a really exciting place to start from, to plan and think about what the long term is going to look like. If it was previously farmed, there's some advantages to having that soil being worked, knowing what some of the challenges may be. If there's water and standing water in places, you can actually get that information from the previous farmer that was there, especially with thinking of microclimates and frost pockets and things like that. Building equity, building that equity that you can then loan against for infrastructure improvements or equipment purchases can be a very good way to build your business more quickly. So you can live on site if that's possible. Some places allow for building if there's not already a home on site. It's quite convenient to be able to walk out the door in the morning and be ready to farm. There's the long-term investment that you're making in the soil, weed management, fencing, infrastructure, building sheds and things like that you can really get those things done, get those things accomplished in the first few years, invest the money in, and then have those in place so you don't have to think about redoing or moving any of that if you were to move off of that land. And it just really does feel more secure. So some of the drawbacks, especially for farms, beginning farmers especially, is qualifying for loans. Most traditional bank loans won't loan to beginning farmers. There are lots of beginning farmer programs through the USDA, Northwest Farm Credit Services, and maybe even your credit union that would allow you to qualify for a loan specifically on a farm. But those can be a little bit more tricky than qualifying it for as a first-time home buyer. They put farms in a different category. So keeping records is going to be really important the first, years that you are farming, in hopes of obtaining enough financial records to qualify for a loan. You might have a high mortgage payment, especially if you're in an area that has high land prices, adjacent to cities, in cities, and towns. Those mortgage payments can be quite steep, and accounting for that in your enterprise budgets. So the rehabilitation of previously farmed land, there may be a lot of work that needs to be done if it was farmed differently than what you anticipate doing. There may be significant weed problems. There may be other sorts of soil management techniques that you really need to be thinking about mitigating before you can start farming. Updating infrastructure, maybe the barn that is on the property needs a new roof in order for you to be able to store anything in it. Updating fences, things like that can really be a drawback if you want to get on the ground and get farming. Those can be things that you have to fix first, and you are locked in for that the life of that loan payment. So looking at free land, this is an empty city lot. And there are lots of these, I think, and especially in the West, there are places in our cities that are uninhabited. There's no buildings, there's no park, it's just kind of there. And those, you can actually find out who might own that space by going to your county records person, the person who's in charge of sending out the property tax bills. They have records on who owns every lot in the county. And I know when we were looking for land, we would drive around the county looking at places and go, I wonder who owns that, if there was nobody who lived on site or it was a bare piece of land and it seemed uninhabited. We have actually gone into our county, into the county assessor's office, and gotten information and wrote a few letters to those landowners, seeing if they were interested in letting us use their land. And unfortunately, we never heard back from any. But that doesn't mean that that can't happen. And I actually know of several farmers who that's how they acquired their land, is it was, an estate that somebody had passed on, and their family didn't know what to do with it. And they were really thankful that the farmer actually showed up and wanted to use that. So that can be an option. There's, in most cases, it's going to be, there needs to be some sort of arrangement. And I always say that free isn't always free, that there's always something about it that that you have to work with and work around when securing that land. So one of the really cool examples of this free land is the Urban Farming guys. They are in Kansas City, Missouri, and they have really rehabilitated several city lots in inner city Kansas City, which is quite poverty stricken. There's a lot of empty buildings, abandoned schools, where they've gone in, they have this great business plan, they have this great following, this group of volunteers that they've come in and absolutely transformed neighborhoods with what they're doing. So it's building a local economy, it's building capacity for people who live in the neighborhood, especially young people, and building this really resilient livelihood while giving back to the community in this really open source way, where they're sharing their tools and they're sharing their knowledge to teach people how to farm. It's a really neat model. If you're not familiar with those guys, they put out some really great videos. So inheriting land through family or non-family options, in many ways, this can be a really neat way to learn about the land that you might be farming. Working through several years of apprenticing on that land, transferring over the knowledge, equipment, infrastructure, things like that. That sometimes can be done over several years, or it can be done in a very short amount of time. In my family's experience, the family who took over the land that my grandfather was farming after he passed, carried then a lease on that land that was what they call a 99-year lease. And as long as everybody met the agreements of the lease of each year, then they kept farming that land, and we eventually sold that land to that farmer. And so there's this previous use and maybe some expectations of the family, or whoever owns that land, of what is going to happen with it. So having those really detailed conversations that we'll be mentioning here in a little bit, about what to do with that land, and agreements, as we've talked about. It's really important to get written agreements, and those are living documents. Those can change with both people's agreement to that over time. They don't have to be set in stone, but it is good to have in writing some of the agreements that you make about the land. And then there may be prior operating agreements where there is somebody currently operating on that land, that is going to continue operating that land for an amount of time before you're able to do anything with it. And in most cases, that's for more large scale agriculture, but it can be done in small scale agriculture as well. So we're going to pause here and ask for any questions.
We don't have any questions yet. If a question does come up, please type it in the question box and we'll be happy to answer it. But I think we could go ahead and move on to the next slide until we have some questions.
Okay. Oops. Sorry about that.
So I want to talk about the aspect of readiness. So are you ready to pursue a land tenure option? And in order to be ready, you really need to have assessed your personal goals and discussed those goals with your family or your farm partners or your life partners. Be really clear on what it is you want to do and why, and make sure that there's support and agreement for those goals. You need to identify your business goals to understand how much money is it that you do want to make. What portion of your income is going to be coming from this farming operation? Is it something that you're really looking to have some extra income that you're going to put away for your child's college? Is this something that you want to do full time to support you and or your family? Is it something that you want to do part time because you have another career that you really enjoy? You really need to be clear about what those business goals are. And you'll also need to assess your current financial position and resources. So if you don't know what your financial situation is, then it's really hard to know what you can afford in terms of land, either purchasing land or leasing land. And it's hard for you to evaluate some of your land tenure options. For instance, if you have enough money for a down payment, but that means that you're not going to have enough money to invest in fencing, and you're in an area where you either need to fence livestock in or you need to fence wild critters out, then you may not be able to be in a position to purchase land right now. And also, if you're looking at leasing land, you might need to really look at things like your cash flow. Are you going to have the resources to make a monthly lease payment, or do you need to develop your lease in a way that you could make a payment after the income comes from the sale of your livestock or your crops? So really understanding in depth your current financial position and the resources available to you are important. You also need to understand your future earning potential. So how much money are you going to be able to make on this farm? Do you have a really good projection? Do you understand your markets? Because if you're going to make the investment into buying land or into leasing land, you don't want to lose that investment by not adequately identifying where your income is going to come from to make payments on that land. So we wanted to do a poll to see where you all are in terms of looking at these different options for land tenure. So which of the following have you completed in terms of your readiness for, for being on your own farmland? Have you developed written personal goals? Have you discussed those goals with family and partners? developed some written business goals, assessed your financial position and resources, or estimated your future earning potential? We have about a quarter of our participants that have voted so far. 30%. Great. 60%. I'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So about 20% of our audience tonight has developed written personal goals, and about 40% have discussed their goals with their family or partners. 30% have written business goals. About 10% have looked at their financial position and resources, and nobody yet has moved into looking at their earning potential. So I think that that's, it's great to know where you're starting. It's also great to know that you have a lot of resources available to you to help you identify what your goals are and get them down on paper. And so some of the handouts that you have tonight are worksheets that will be helpful for you, because beyond a great vision really is a plan. You really want to develop a business plan, a whole farm plan, a marketing plan, because really if you don't have a plan, if you haven't thought through what you want to do, put it down on paper, you're really not going to know what you can afford. So in the handouts that you do have a personal and business goals worksheet that will help you identify what your goals are and communicate those goals. You also have a worksheet that's on land tenure readiness that is a really simple checklist to help you identify, where am I on these different steps? And again, you want to develop a plan so that you can move forward and keep assessing your readiness and decide when you are ready. The value of a plan is really that it's a decision-making tool. It's not a hard and fast map of where you're going to go and how you're going to get there, but it does include your vision and the goals that you have, and it includes why you think you can achieve those goals and what your plan is for doing so. And the real value of developing a plan is in the process of developing it, and then also coming back and revisiting it over time. And lots of times when we take the time to think through things, we can evaluate, we can make changes. It's almost like we hardwire our goals, and it helps us take the next launch into the future. So really this is about process and being clear about where we want to go and how we're going to get there. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of resources available to you. If you've taken a Cultivating Success course, these resources here have been introduced to you already. Farming Alternatives is a very inexpensive guide that it's available from Cornell University. And one of the great things about this publication is there are a lot of worksheets with very short, clear explanations. So it's a great book for you to have, whether you're starting a new farming enterprise or you're looking at developing different enterprises on an existing farm. So for instance, if you are part of a family farm, but you want to carve off a piece of that land and develop your own operation, your own enterprise, this workbook would be very helpful for you. At Home with Holistic Management, this is a book that again is very easy to read. It has some great exercises in it, and it really helps you look at your plan for achieving the goals that you've set, and it walks you through some steps to test different options for moving forward to those goals. And I think those, how holistic management lays out these different tests to say, am I on the right track? Is this really going to move me towards my goal? Is pretty clever, and it's a really nice process to keep you checking in on that process of moving forward. We also have many courses available through Cultivating Success, and we'll be talking about those more at the end of this webinar. A free resource is Building a Sustainable Business that was put together by the USDA Sustainable Ag Research and Education Program. Again, it's quite a comprehensive resource, but it is a resource that has a lot of worksheets, and that can be really helpful. And you can do the worksheets over, you can create a binder, and just really use those as tools to reassess and keep updating your plans as your ideas get more clear. In terms of developing a business plan, there are a lot of resources available. Ag Plan is an online tool that asks you questions, you put in information, and at the end you will actually generate a file that is a printable PDF of your business plan. You create a login so you can go back in and you can update that plan at any time. It's confidential to you, it's ad-free, and it doesn't cost you anything. So it's a great resource to look at. If you haven't ever visited the ATRA site, ATRA has a lot of information on sustainable agriculture in broad context, from production, marketing, business management. They do have a lot of templates. If you're not really a person that likes to go through and do a step-by-step process in the computer, you like to lay it all out, you can print off their templates and look at their resources and start to build your plan that way. We have regional small business development centers. I believe they're in every state. So even if you're not in Idaho, you could visit your small business development center. In Idaho, it is free to get consulting from the Small Business Development Center. They can help you develop a business plan. They can direct you to local resources, and they oftentimes have classes that are very inexpensive that help you develop specific skills. If you're looking at buying land or you are leasing land but you need an operating loan, the Northwest Farm Credit Ag Vision program is specifically designed for beginning producers, and a beginning producer in this program is 10 years or less. You do not have to be young. You can be young and beginning, or you can just be beginning. One of the great things about Farm Credit Services is that they really look at your family or your farm partnership as a unit. They will help you in your communication. They really promote educational programs, and if you complete different educational programs, you can actually lower the interest rate on a loan through Northwest Farm Credit. So it's a great program. Definitely check them out. And if you go onto their website, you will find that there's farm credit offices probably within an hour or two from where you're located, depending on how rural you are. The Farm Service Agency has a beginning farmer loan program. This loan program is something that if you're interested in it, it will have really favorable rates. You will need to start to gather your production financial data from the onset. So this program is one that likely you would grow into, probably leasing a farm, or having a production system on somebody's land where you have your own discrete set of books, because you do need to have previous production records to qualify for these loan programs. But there's someone to start talking to now, because then you know what you would need to qualify for a loan. So let's see if we have any questions about preparing for land tenure. So we don't, but there was a glitch in the poll, so I'm sorry about that you couldn't check more than one option. So I apologize. That would be an error in my creating it. Are there any questions about the material that we've shared so far? Okay, we'll go on to the next segment. So Marci's going to talk about acquiring land to farm.
All right. So one of the great resources, and those were all fantastic resources. When Greg and I were going through the Cultivating Success program ourselves, we acquired copies of all of those books, and Building a Sustainable Business and Farming Alternatives both have such, and the At Home with Holistic Management all have such wonderful worksheets that even if you don't go through one book cover to cover, pulling some of the worksheets out of each of those to really help you formulate that plan and the vision of your farm, we found to be incredibly helpful. And one of the things that Greg and I did is we filled those out separately, and then we came together and filled them out together. And that was a really fascinating look at what each of us were thinking about what our farm would look like, and then what we kind of came together and combined those plans. We also used the ag planning website, the first one on that resource list that walks you through your business plan, kind of really step by step, really simple way to walk through and figure out how to do that. And this that leads you to acquiring this land. When are you ready to really get out onto a piece of land, and also knowing what questions you might have for a potential landowner when leasing or buying. So landforgood.org is a great resource for acquiring land. They've got a land seeker toolkit. They also have a landowner resources, as well as farm transition support. So for families who are looking at transitioning land to the next generation, they do have resources available on their website to walk you through some of those steps. And contacting them with any of the questions that you might have, they are happy to help with that. So we have a publication coming out, hopefully in the next few months, about farmland assessment. And what are the things that you really need to be looking at when you go and start looking at land to farm? And what are some of the questions on a list that you may not even be thinking about right now? Before you go out and start and sign a lease or sign your life away on a mortgage, what do you need to be looking at? And one of the things that we really like doing and like encouraging other beginning farmers to do is look at a lot of land. Take every opportunity you can to go and look at current operations, people who are currently farming, see what they're doing, see what they have, ask them questions. What are the things that are really important for your type of operation? And then go out and look. One of the things that we did when we were looking at land was we actually just kept a shovel in the back of our truck. So when we would go out to a piece of property that we thought we might be interested in looking at, we would actually go and dig a pit, not a big one, but enough so that we could actually start to see the soil structure and see what it looks like. Did it have good tilth? Were there earthworms present? Really scouting and looking at what weeds are present. Are they annual weeds? Are they perennial weeds that you have to deal with on a long-term basis? What's the climate like? Are there frost pockets? Are there places for cold air to move down to? Are you up on a hill? Are you down in a draw? What's the history of the location? What has it previously been used for? And get as much of that information as you possibly can, almost in an interview of like, how was it used? How was it managed? How long has it been in production? What was there before you were on the land? Really trying to get as much history as you possibly can. Looking at water. Water is really such a big issue in farming. Where is your water source, and what does that future use look like? If you are looking at a piece of land and the landowner is not quite sure what the water rights or water use looks like for the future, that might be something to investigate further with some sort of regulatory or technical agency in your area, to find out about, can you drill another well if the well that is present isn't sufficient enough or there is no well. If you have surface water, what do you need to be doing to put in infrastructure to use that surface water, and then thinking about testing that water. What is, are there any contaminants in that water you need to be thinking about and treating for if possible? What infrastructure is available? Is it suitable for what you want to do, or is it modifiable for the things that you would like to be doing? What is your proximity to market? How far do you have to drive to get to the nearest market or the marketplace that you've chosen, your nearest outlet? And are you and your potential partners willing to drive those distances to market? My husband has always said he doesn't want to be any more than about 15 miles from Moscow, because this is the heart of where we sell our produce, and it's his goal to not have to travel very far. So we'd weigh that against other things, knowing that those land costs that we're looking at are going to be a little bit higher. And then what are your neighbors doing? What are they up to? What sorts of farming activities or non-farming activities do they have going on? If you are adjacent to populations, if you have close neighbors nearby, maybe investigating what they might be okay with, knowing that they may not be too happy about you having a flock of chickens and a rooster crowing first thing in the morning, but can you ease some of those relations by giving them a dozen eggs, on the house to keep them happy, and so you can keep doing what you want to be doing. So financing farmland, this is a big topic, and a topic that we will be covering more in depth, but accessing capital. What do you need to start your farm? What can you scrape together? What do you have in your savings? What can you buy used from other people, or what can you make do with what you have? I think farmers are some of the most industrious people that I have ever met in my life, and I love it. I love going to people's farms and seeing what creative uses they have for things that maybe weren't intended for that. I think I laugh sometimes that we call ourselves farmer pirates, because when we see a junk pile laying next to a dumpster on the side of the road, we might scout that for things that might be useful to us in the future. Especially when we had chickens, we were always scouting for things that we could use for them. So financing, may also depend on what your needs are. If you're full-time or part-time farming, are you going to be part-time farming for a period of time, working towards full-time farming, and recognizing that your income and expenses are going to change during that transition. And then leasing or purchasing options, having those down payments available, having some sort of financing available if you are not able to save enough for a down payment on a piece of land, and then what those needs are. So this is an example of somebody who owns a beautiful 238-acre piece of land here outside of Moscow. It's 15 miles from Moscow. It has a home, it has a barn, a creek, a pond. It's fenced. It has a machine shop and outbuildings. It is an absolutely gorgeous piece of property. I've gone and driven by it. And this is somebody who owns this property that would love to see somebody on it farming. And when I saw the price, I realized that you won't be farming. Oh, my price didn't come up. A farmer would have a hard time owning this piece of land because they are asking approximately $385,000 for it. So I'm sorry, $800,000. It was, I had to pull that up. This is somebody who's coming in with money to have a nice piece of property. This is not necessarily for a small farm. Somebody who wants to farm for a living. So, there's a lot of property out there that would be absolutely suitable, but the asking prices can be quite steep. So where can you look for land that you can actually afford? One of the programs that we started with Cultivating Success this last year is Idaho Farmlink. This is a connection piece. for people who are looking for land and also landowners who would like to lease or sell land that they have. And you can find that information on our website, cultivatingsuccess.org/farmlink, and you can fill out an application, and we'll get back to you with any additional details, and we'll get you listed on a map that you'll see example of here pretty soon. So I talked earlier about a county assessor's office. Going in, you see a piece of property and ask for that person's contact information, address, and write them a letter. Realtors definitely have their finger on the pulse of property for sale. Washington FarmLink is a farm link for a lot of Western Washington, Central Washington farms. There are a few listed in adjacent in Oregon and Idaho as well. Montana also has a farm link website, so you can really expand your region looking for available farmland. Your county extension educator, they know farmers and they know people who may be retiring or people who are looking to get out of farming, and just making that connection with your county extension educator can be a great way to put the bug in their ear that, hey, I'm looking for land, this is what I'm looking for, and they may get a phone call one day from somebody who has that, and they're going to have you in mind, especially if you are kind of keeping on the top of their list. Keep in contact with them. Craigslist is another one that's being able to go in there and kind of browse real estate for sale or for lease is absolutely a way that some people are finding land. Those tend to go pretty quick because I think everybody's especially in our region are looking to get out of town and get on some land. Natural Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS office, they're out working with landowners. And so that's a great way, another connection piece. Get on their radar, let them know that you're looking for land, and they may be able to connect you with somebody that they know. Other farmers, I can't tell you how many times we're approached at farmers market and people ask if we want to grow on their land, and we often say no, but man, give us your information. We may be talking to somebody that is looking for land, so we oftentimes have beginning farmers come by farmers market, asking us if we know of anything that they could be farming. So we also have a listserv. Rural Roots has a listserv that's free to join. You can contact me directly, or you can go to our website there, ruralroots.org, and sign up for our Rural Roots Sustainable Ag Talk listserv. And that is a listserv not only for land, but for upcoming events and all kinds of things. So it's a good way to get your finger on the pulse of what's happening in sustainable ag in Idaho and adjacent. Land trusts. So in Moscow, we have the Palouse Land Trust, but there are land trusts popping up all over the place, and they're doing good work in preserving agricultural land as well. So reaching out to them, letting them know you're looking for land. And then other food and farm organizations. There's all kinds of other organizations out there that might be having people contact them. That's their point of contact in sustainable agriculture. And you just never know when you start talking to people. So this is our farm link. This is what it looks like. And we are going to have a webinar on February 26th. And it'll be the same time. You can go to the Cultivating Success website and sign up for this one as well. But this is kind of what it's going to look like. You can see here on the map of Idaho that we've got these pins, and they are showing people who are seeking land, and they also show landowners and a couple of other, there's a key on that website with some of those other pins. But over here on the left side of your screen, you can see what it looks like when you submit an application as a land seeker. This is the information that we show publicly on the website. So there's no identifying information, there's no personal information. It's strictly what it is that you're looking for. And same for landowners. It's what is available, what it's currently being used for, if it's utilizing any sort of organic practice or not, and then what arrangements that landowner is open to. So no identifying information whatsoever. But this is a free resource for people in Idaho, and we really encourage you to sign up on there if you're looking for land or you have land that you would like to share.
Thank you, Marci. So we did have one question that came in that I'll answer really quickly. Erica asks if you all will get copies of the presentation and other resources from this presentation, and yes. So those are in the handouts that are available for you to download tonight. And if you have any trouble downloading those handouts, I can email them to you directly. You can just let me know. So in addition to the different worksheets that I mentioned, in those handouts, there's an introduction to land tenure. So it has a number of resources about land tenure. And then as we move forward, I'll be talking about leasing land, and there's a resource list for leasing land. If you're looking at a specific land tenure option, please contact me because I would be happy to help you identify resources specific to the options that you are most interested in. I wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the key factors that affect land values, because you're going to find that land values vary widely. And oftentimes, if you are a landowner or if you are a land seeker, you don't know what's reasonable in terms of a land value. So what would a good sales price be? What would a good lease price be? And again, that goes back to what you can afford. So location has a huge impact on the cost of land. As Marci mentioned, generally speaking, if you are closer to an urban center or if you are in a really pretty environment, land is going to be more expensive. Where there's a higher competition for land, again, land is going to be more expensive. So you might go to a rural area that's known for its tourism potential and find that land is incredibly expensive. You might go to another place that's really rural, land's not so expensive, but then you have to calculate what your cost is going to be of taking your product to market and whether or not you can afford those transportation costs. Soil productivity does make a difference on land values, particularly if somebody understands ag land and they are leasing or selling the land as farmland, then they're going to be asking a higher price the better the soils are, which directly relates to the productivity you can expect in terms of your crops or livestock. Water availability is another issue. If water is available in terms of water rights, which you're definitely going to want to know about, then you can expect that that land is going to cost more. Also, if water is available because somebody has invested in the infrastructure to have one or more wells, to have piped water to different areas of the farm, perhaps a windmill's installed, all of those things are going to change the price and the value of your land. And you may find that it does make sense to buy land that does have that infrastructure, because when you price out putting that onto raw land, it could look much better for you to purchase land that already has it, and it may not. So again, these are some of the financial considerations that you're going to need to weigh when you look at whatever land you might want to access. Also, if there's existing improvements on the land, this may be, maybe the land is tiled in places if it has low spots that tend to be really wet, or there is infrastructure like power, which could be really important if you have livestock on your farm, or if you are producing fruits and vegetables and you want to have a cooler available on site. Also, access to the land could be considered an improvement, whether or not you have a road that is maintained by the county, or perhaps you have a road that you have access to the land, but you have to pay the upkeep on that road. So those are things that might affect the land value. The current property condition, you know, the nicer the piece of property, the better condition it is, whether it's been managed organically or not, whether there's potential to have some contaminants, all of those things can really affect your land values. And also the landowner needs and wishes and what the tax base is for the particular piece of agricultural land. And I think that this is really important. If you are a land seeker, you really want to understand what the landowner needs and be able to ask questions so that when you're talking to them, you can look at whether or not you can meet those needs, or if you have shared values in terms of what they wish would happen to that land, you can speak to that. And creating those connections and honoring those needs can really help you establish a working relationship that might create some flexibility in the price, because there could then also be a conversation about what your needs are. And then taxes, if it's agricultural land, it may be that a landowner is very interested in leasing land for agricultural use because they want that lower tax rate, and therefore you might be able to get a lower lease fee. So how do you set the price? Really, you need to negotiate based on what's real, and that's what you can afford. And sometimes in those conversations with a landowner, you might be able to share your business plan or a portion of your business plan to really establish what it means to be a farmer and what the type of return on investment you can expect. So in the example that Marci shared, where there's this beautiful farm and somebody is wanting to sell it for somebody to have their dream small farm, that landowner that is selling the land might not understand that farming is generally not um, a really high income profession. It has high quality of life. It can create a great income for a family, but it would be a real stretch to be able to meet a mortgage that is on an almost $900,000 piece of land. But a lot of landowners just really don't understand agriculture enough to know that you're not going to make hundreds of dollars on every square inch of your land. So you want to know what you can afford, and you want to be able to have an approachable conversation with a landowner. You also want to look at some of the services you might be able to provide to that landowner in exchange for use of that land. And Marci mentioned a number of these when she talked about the pros and cons of leasing land. So a CSA share could be a great option, and that could be a vegetable share. It could be a flower share. It might even be a meat CSA. So CSAs are not just limited to fruits and vegetables. You might be able to offer land management services for portions of the land that you aren't actually leasing for your own production. So that might be that you are looking at having a couple acres in a very desirable spot for fruit and vegetable production, but there's a lot of pasture land and you're willing to maintain fences on that pasture land, or work with a farmer who might be growing forage crops on that land and manage that relationship on behalf of the landowner. You might provide care for livestock that the landowner actually owns and that you don't own, but that would be a helpful service that you could do. As I mentioned, you might do some pasture management, you might do weed management, and if they're a landowner that has horses, you could offer to take care of those horses, take care of the barn, the stalls, and maybe in exchange for that care, you'd also be able to store your tools in a certain portion of their outbuildings. So it helps to be creative, and again, it really is really important to understand what those landowner needs are and look for ways that you could provide services in exchange for your use of that land. So we'll see if there's any questions about accessing or securing land at this time. I don't see that any have come in. I'll just have to share that this is like my favorite hog. This is at Story Orchards, and so we were out looking at heritage apples on a visit for the Moscow Farmers Market, and there's a number of hogs in this side pen, and they run right up and they love to be scratched. It's a pretty sweet side operation that they have at that orchard. So now I want to talk about, is a handshake enough? Is it enough to have a verbal agreement for leasing land? So with written agreements, we definitely know that there's pros and cons. And I thought maybe you all could help us identify what's wrong with written agreements. Because while we know that there's pros and cons, and we've talked about a lot of the pros on this webinar tonight, we know that a lot of people don't have written agreements. So our next poll is looking at some of the great reasons not to have a written agreement. So what are your thoughts? Is it a good reason maybe because it takes too much time to create it? Or it's best to avoid conflict because, definitely landowners and tenants aren't going to agree on the terms, or I'll be locked in and there's no escape. Either I'm a landowner and, well, what if I really don't like this person and I want to get out of this situation, or um, I don't know how to create a lease. It seems like it's really overwhelming. What is involved in a lease? And then another option might be that a landowner, this is my friend or this is a family member, so I don't think I really need a written lease. So these are all pretty common reasons that people would say that they don't need a lease. And it's very likely, I have to apologize, that I might have made a mistake in building this poll as well, so that you can only select your favorite answer about why it's a really bad idea to have a lease agreement. So I'm going to close the poll, uh, and I can share the results. But as you know, I was being a bit facetious with that poll, but just really wanted to talk about why is it that people aren't doing written agreements. And we're really advocating that written agreements are important. And when you look at some of the agreements that are out there for farmland, you definitely want to do a lease that's appropriate to farmland if you're leasing farmland. But this slide just shows one small piece of a segment of a sample lease and some of the types of things that might be in a lease that you would want to discuss with a landowner, like, are you required to keep open ditches, tile drains, tile outlets, grass waterways, and terraces in good repair? Are you responsible for the noxious weeds and making sure they don't go to seed? Are there some provisions about how you can do weed management? Um, where do things need to be stored on the land? Can you store things on the land? All of these things are part of written agreements. So I have to say this is not legal advice, and it's worth the money to have any lease that you do reviewed by an attorney. But there are some components of leases that, are pretty standard for a good lease. So you'll have a preamble that's going to describe what the lease is about. You'll have a legal description of the leased property, and this may be again that you're leasing one particular part of a larger property. So it's going to describe the piece of property that's under your management, the term, which is the length of the lease, the cost, and what the payment provisions are. Like I mentioned before, are you going to pay monthly or are you going to pay once a year? And there are specific leases that look at crop share and are designed for people who are either sharing, doing a crop share in terms of a percentage of the crop itself is available to the landowner for sale or for their use, or it could be that it's a percentage of the profits made from the crop. So there's many different ways to look at crop share, but that is a specific lease agreement. You want to be clear about the operating costs and maintenance, who's responsible for those. And as a leasee, are you going to be required to carry liability insurance? And are you going to have an indemnification clause that holds the landowner essentially not responsible for any types of liabilities for the activities that you've done on the farm or whether somebody gets hurt on their land. And you might also specify in a really good lease whether or not the landowner is required to have a specific kind of insurance. Who's going to pay the taxes? If any assessments need to happen, who's responsible for organizing them and paying for them? So for instance, you might need to have well water testing or surface water testing to make sure that it's free of bacterial contaminants and you know that you can use it in terms of irrigating your crops or feeding your livestock. So who's going to pay for that? You're really going to want to identify the initial condition of the premises. So down the road, you have a document that states what things are like. You might want to include pictures in that. So if there's been some degradation of the premises and it's clear where that's come from, what the original condition was, and you can benchmark against that. Or also you may have improved some things on that premises that you decide, this has really got some value, or you've written it into the lease that you're going to improve the soil, and because of your soil management practices, you're going to have a lower lease rate. So it's written in there that initially you had a baseline and you're moving towards a specific target. Can you sublet or transfer your lease? What are the expectations about compliance with the law? What happens if the tenant defaults or if the landowner decides that they want to end the lease? And how are you going to handle disputes? Other things that you're going to want to address are visitors to the farm. Does the landowner allow you to have visitors? Can you have them overnight? So if you have an open piece of land, is it someplace that you or your friends can go camp overnight? Or if there's living arrangements, what are they? And who's responsible for the upkeep? Who's responsible for paying the electricity? If there's a water bill, if you need to have something done in terms of the well pump goes out, who's going to pay for that? And then what are the rules for having pets or livestock animals on the farm? These are just a few of the things that you need to consider. If you are in a situation where you are thinking that you want to lease land, I'd be happy to share some sample leases with you and talk with you about how you might look at those leases and use them as a learning tool to develop your plan and identify your questions for a landowner. And the resource list that is one of your handouts, the Leasing Land resource list, has a lot of great publications that are really going to help you think through those lease arrangements. One of the best things I think that you can do if you're interested in leasing land, whether you are a landowner or you are a land seeker, is that you can get a couple different sample leases and then you can go through and you can highlight things that are really important to you or things that you would question whether or not you need to have them as a lease. And again, then you can create a list of questions for interviewing each other about that relationship in terms of talking through what it might be like to be on somebody else's land or to lease your land to someone else. Here's another great resource, and this is from Farm Commons. They have a number of print resources as well as videos and podcasts, and they're both for drafting leases and also if you're thinking about financing a farmland purchase. So one of the things about farmland purchases, if you are buying a house with land and you intend to farm it, there is a chance that your lender may not be okay with that. And so there's some things that you need to talk about with your lender prior to actually securing your loan from them. And these resources are going to help you think about those things. So do we have any questions about lease agreements? So let's see, we have a question from Peter. Any thoughts on how to convince landowners that they should lease for a working farm rather than to horse people or lifestyle farmers? I think that one of the best things that you can do is talk to a landowner and really identify what it is that they're interested in and what they value, because then you may be able to create some negotiation based on what you can do for them or what you can provide for them, or how having that land in working production is going to meet part of their vision or fulfill some of the values that they want to have in terms of their own life. And it would also really help you know if you can, if they have some type of financial obligation or the way the land is held, that there's not a lot of wiggle room around that, and that it's something that you need to move on from. We have another comment from Peter, and he says, leases are so important, so I'm glad that you're talking about it. On the leases, I'd also suggest recording the lease, or if you want to keep them private, recording a memorandum of lease so that others looking at the property for financing, potential purchase, etc., have notice. That's a really great that's a really great point. And in your lease, there should definitely be a clause about what happens if the landowner is wanting to sell that piece of land, and whether the expectation is that that lease is going to carry with any sale of the land. Let's see, I'm checking to see if there's any other questions. We don't have any other questions at this time. So we'll move on to say that really only you can adequately prepare and do the work of accessing land. So we really encourage you to educate yourself, make a plan, and assemble your team. There are a lot of resource people out there that really can help you. A number of them are with Cultivating Success through Extension and Rural Roots. Also, other farmers can be part of your team. So go to different workshops, meet people, talk to people at market. You know, you might want to get on some Facebook sites like Growing for Market, where you can talk to other farmers and ask questions. Again, their small business development centers are great resources that I think we're not taking advantage of enough. And then the Natural Resource Conservation Service can also be a really great partner and is really important part of your team, because they have a lot of cost share programs for people that do own land for improvements and looking at water and soil and fencing and habitat restoration. So there might be resources out there that would be really helpful to you. So finding the right piece of land is worth the time and effort it will take. So with Cultivating Success, as we mentioned, there are a number of resources available through our website. This is where you would access FarmLink. It's also where we post all the different programs that we have. One of the programs that will be offered in different places around the state this spring and through the summer is a land assessment workshop, where you will actually go out in the field, look at land, do some assessment, and have some hands-on activities with farmer mentors and extension educators to really understand how you do those site assessments. So this is the website where that will be listed. Also, there's this one-day workshop that we do. It's called Is a Small Farm in Your Future? That might be a really good workshop for you to take if you're still wondering whether or not you want to farm, or you want to have some more resources, develop some relationships with other people in your area. As we mentioned, we have our Your Small Farm webinar series. All these webinars are free. And if we add additional webinars, they are going to be listed on our website. The next webinar that we're having are cover crops for Idaho small farms. This is actually going to be on a Tuesday night, so Tuesday, February 20th. The majority of the webinars are on Monday, but this one is on Tuesday due to Lauren's schedule. And I think that you'll find it to be a really great resource and a fun webinar to attend. So with that, I want to invite Marci to make any final comments that she has and to give you all a few more minutes to ask any questions that you have.
Thank you. Well, I really like this information that we're sharing. I think that these really are some of the most often times the questions that we get the most from beginning farmers. So, and I guess while we're wrapping up, I'll share with you guys a really funny story for those of you who were at the Farm Link or tuned into or Farm Law Facebook Live or event the other night. Heard this story about these farmers who had to do a midnight escape with vegetables, and that was actually our Greg and I. We had a verbal agreement with a friend who had a nice big garden that we were going to grow produce there, and he had a housemate that was not super thrilled with us growing food there, and things kind of devolved to the point at which we had to show up at, it was like 10 o'clock at night, and we harvested as much as we possibly could and got out of there and had to leave a whole bunch of stuff in the ground. So that's how important leases are over verbal agreements, because you just never know what's going to happen. So, but I think if there's no other questions, Colette.
Okay, great. Well, I see in the questions that Amanda is having trouble downloading the handouts. So I can definitely send those handouts to you, Amanda. And here's my email address, cdephelps@uidaho.edu. I am happy to send anyone handouts that's having trouble downloading them tonight. Also, please give me a call or send me an email if there's other resources that you are looking for in terms of land access. And Marci and I could both help you in terms of the Idaho FarmLink website. We do hope you tune into that webinar, which is on February 26th, 6 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Mountain. And finally, we'd really appreciate it if you would take our post-workshop webinar series. This is something that will launch automatically for you when we conclude tonight's webinar. And it's just 10 short questions. Most of them are multiple choice. And we would really appreciate your feedback on how we can improve this webinar. The webinar has been recorded and it will be posted through the Cultivating Success website. So if you ever want to revisit it or you'd like to recommend it to others, it will be available. So we thank you very much and wish you a great night.